Hello and welcome to Nick Griffin Beyond the Pale, and whether you're joining me now live or later on, you're all very welcome indeed. I've got a lot for you today, of course, where we've in Britain got the chaos of Keir Starmer and Peter Mandelson. I'm actually not going to talk about that to any extent at all, because it's obvious that Keir Starmer is the worst prime minister since we've had since the last prime minister. You know, all the right-wing Brits are saying Keir Starmer, the Labour Party, they've flooded Britain with immigrants. They have. But what was the Boris wave? That was the Conservative Party flooding us with immigrants. What's Nigel Farage? He's saying he's going to stop all the illegals. He's going to send some of the illegals out. But for every Brit who leaves or dies, he's going to be happy to allow in an Indian, the Hindu. So they're all the same. They're all to blame. If you haven't worked it out, you probably wouldn't be watching this show, as I suspect, as a matter of fact. So that's enough of that. And of course, we've got the continuing saga in Iran, which I will touch on more later. First of all, let me just dive into the show. And Roger Madison is first in with us this evening. Smart chat, Roger. And I'm very pleased to see you. I hope that you can hear me and see me. Paul Telford has joined us as well. Good stuff. So I think we're all okay. So let me dive into what I want to talk about to start with, which is starting off with the Southern Poverty Law Centre. That's it. That's and particularly this headline, interesting headline in The Guardian, which is being a left-wing paper. It loves the Southern Poverty Law Centre. Now, Americans will know what I'm talking about when I talk about the SPLC. I think most Brits will. If you Brits don't know, basically, I'm talking about the American version of Hope Not Hate. Highly left-wing, highly Zionist, and fanatically anti-British, or in this case anti-American, and of course anti-white. And it's very interesting, this Guardian story, considering the Guardian loves the SPLC. They've got this headline: Southern Poverty Law Centre indicted on federal fraud charges. And indeed they are, on a big scale. The article tells us this: the Southern Poverty Law Centre, the prominent civil rights organisation, has been indicted on federal fraud charges relating to past payments it made to confidential informants to infiltrate extremist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, the Justice Department has announced. Todd Blanche, the acting Attorney General, has said that an Alabama grand jury has returned an 11-count indictment against the SPLC, including wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. And what Blanche has said is that this group was, quote, doing the exact opposite of what it's told its donors it was doing, not dismantling extremism, but funding it. Blanche was joined by FBI Director Kash Patel, who called the paid informant program, quote, a serious and egregious violation of a group that purported to dismantle violent extremist groups, but in turn actually only fuel the hatred, unquote. And according to prosecutors, the SPLC funneled more than $3 million to grasses and informers and provocateurs within extremist groups between 2014 and 2023. And the SPLC is accused of lying to donors when they were told that they would dismantle violent groups, when the money was actually used to pay leaders in the violent groups to encourage them to be violent. Prosecutors say the organisation also lied to banks about who owned the entities. The FBI used to have a relationship with the SPLC, but it ended them last year and said that they were not good at all. So quite a remarkable story, actually. Very, very good to see. And it would be splendid, wouldn't it, if the same was done against Hope Not Hate in Britain, because they're up to the same tricks as are the other, even more blatantly Zionist Operation Searchlight. If you've ever looked at some hardcore Nazi crackpot, supposedly in the movement, but actually polluting the movements in Britain and in the United States, if you look deep enough, or when it all comes out, you will find they were paid by these people. And the very reason that they push the most extreme and ugly and instantly loathed form of racism, nationalism, whatever you want to call it, is of course in order to pollute the water in which the fish swim, in order to tar us all with the same brush. throughout my years in the BNP, whenever we had someone who was throwing the Nazi salutes about and so on, they were either a total moron, or if they weren't a moron, they were a mini Ray Hill, someone who was being paid to do it by people like the Southern Poverty Law Centre. So it's really good to see them potentially get their comeuppance. Whether they will or not, that's another matter. But we certainly have to hope so. And well, I'll keep my eye, in fact, on that, and we'll let you know. Roger Madison, originally fighting for civil rights, for at least a couple of decades, they were largely a fraud, as this indictment is now showing. More than that, Ivan Cooper's just joined us. Hello, Ivan, good to see you. More than a fraud, they're a viciously anti-white organization. I remember a few years ago, there was some clever bright spark when one of the leaders of this organization was being interviewed. Some clever bright spark zoomed in on something that was stuck up behind his desk, and it was a chart showing when white people would become a minority in the United States and the progress being made towards that end. These people are vicious, anti-white, racist scumbags. That is the blunt truth of it. Right then, let me go on to something else. While we're talking about anti-racist white scumbags, let's talk about some others, shall we? Right, but first of all, let's come back to the question of Iran. And I watched what Jim Dowson was saying on the Templar Report last night about this, and how he's almost banging his head against a brick wall to try to get people to understand that a lot of what they think in this regard is probably lies. Now, I do not like, and I know all decent Americans don't like, the way that Trump has broken his promises to keep America out of wars. It's outrageous. But even amongst Americans who know that and accept that and criticize Donald Trump for that, there's still a significant number who say but, and they come in with this but. Everything before but is bullshit, as they say, because what they say after the but is, but perhaps they had to do it because after all, the Iranians are mad, the Iranians are terrorists, etc., etc. No. Now, Islamist terror is a very real thing, and it's a very real threat. But it comes, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, from the Wahhabi Sunni Muslims, the 90% of world Muslims, a section of the 90%. And it's been spread. This radical form of Sunni fundamentalism was first of all spread around the British Empire by the Brits in order to divide the natives. Then more recently, in the case of Al-Qaeda, it was deliberately sort of pumped up by the CIA to use as a weapon against the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. And then more recently again, the CIA and MI6 and Mossad have all of them used and pumped up Islamist extremism and terrorism in order to provide weapons or excuses for their own foreign policy adventures. And Iran has fought against that. Iran, along with the Assad government in Syria and Russia, Iran and its so-called proxy Hezbollah, fought ISIS and Al-Qaeda, real Islamist terrorists, to a standstill in Syria and Iraq. They're on the side of the good guys. Now, I know some Americans will scratch their heads, but wait a minute, what about the bombing of the Marines in Lebanon? Yeah, it was done by Hezbollah, funded and supported by Iran. It's not, I'm sorry, it is not. Let me step back a moment. When the Minutemen and the Over the Mountain Men were shooting British soldiers in America, that was not terrorism. That was a freedom struggle. They were shooting British soldiers because they were occupying their country. So I'm sorry, Americans, if you send your troops to other people's country and occupy them and use them to support Israel when they're butchering people by the tens or hundreds of thousands, what do you expect that they become targets? But that is military to military. It's military losses. You don't go around saying that the Germans in the Second World War were terrorists, because they weren't. They were the enemy. They had to be fought. They had to be defeated. America was fighting the enemy. Yes, they weren't terrorists. It was a military operation. If you're worried about Islamist terrorism, whether it's in Boston or in Britain, wherever it is, then if it's not false flag and completely concocted in the first place, then you will find always that it's carried out by the Sunni extremists. And Iran, well, they offered to go in with America fighting the Taliban because they don't like those Sunni extremists. But war propaganda gets a lot of people. But heavens above, so many nationalists, including in America, understand that basically everything that's told us about the Russia-Ukraine conflict is a lie. Everything that's told us about Vladimir Putin is a lie. But the minute it comes up that October the 6th and Israel's been attacked, oh, all of a sudden they believe everything. The same people who told you that COVID was a real disastrous plague and you had to take toxic jabs in order to survive, the same people who tell you that cow farts are going to destroy the world, so you've got to start eating veggie burgers instead of steaks, the same people telling you those lies are telling you the same lies about Iran. For that matter, it's nothing new, this. Whenever they, the powers that be, have been determined to take us into war, they've done so by lying us into war. And I've got a classic example of that here. Here we go. So that's an American poster, but similar things circulated in Britain, and the same stories circulated in Britain before America was dragged into the First World War, which the people who run, while the American people had to be just dragged into the First World War and the Second World War, the people who run the United States and screw the people of the United States did a great deal to create the First World War and even more to create the Second World War. But once they got a war going, they've got to persuade people to fight it, and there's no better way than portraying your enemy as mad, as brutal, and now the Iranians, they were killing all those peaceful, heavily armed protesters and various sectarian killers and various people who wanted a civil war, and the Iranians apparently killed a number of them. Well, so would the United States, so would Britain. If armed insurrectionists took the streets of Britain, well, they did in Northern Ireland, as a matter of fact, and the British Army went in and shot quite a few of them. So that's the way it goes. But this is typical, this poster, of the way the propaganda is run for war, and always, as always, of course, it's about sex as well. It's about the way that they abuse beautiful young girls. Well, in some cases, monsters and invading armies do, certainly. Invading others do sometimes. But any time that someone, a regime or a system that would make money from a war or would gain geopolitical advantage from a war, anytime they tell you that the people they want you or your sons or your money to go and fight are shooting innocent protesters or abusing women or about to invade your country or about to lob a nuclear bomb at you, anytime they tell you that, you can be pretty sure they are lying, because it's all designed to persuade people who otherwise just want to stay at home in peace and to enjoy the fruits of their own labor, to shell out even more taxes to a government they already know is absolutely rotten and stinking corrupt, but also to send their sons and daughters to fight in another one of their stupid bloody wars. And every time one of these wars comes about, at the starts of it, all the sheeple wave the little plastic flags and go running into the war, happily volunteer their sons, and by the end of it, and certainly once it's looked at, time and time again, they say it was a forced war, it was an unnecessary war, it was a war we were pushed into by lying propaganda, from Germans throwing Belgian babies on the air and catching them with bayonets in 1914, through to weapons of mass destruction with Saddam Hussein and with Iran's alleged nuclear program. It's all bullshit, people. It's all bullshit. Do not swallow this utter poison. It's very, very bad for you, especially because while you're thinking about mythical enemies out there, you're forgetting about the real enemies closer to home. And what Americans should be worrying about isn't Iran. It's not actually even China. It's the mammon power of Washington and Wall Street and the tech bros. They are the people. If anyone's going to stomp all over America with fascist stroke Marxist jackboot squads, if anyone is going to subject you to surveillance, if anyone is going to take away your constitutional rights, your vote, your freedom and your guns, it won't be certainly not the Iranians, not the Chinese, not the Russians. They haven't got enough people to occupy Nevada, let alone the whole of the USA. Come on, grow up. The people who are the threat to your liberties in America, the people who are the threat to our liberties in Britain, are the people who run the country and who run our countries into the ground. So, yes, the Iranians are Muslims. So, Pete Hegseth and Peter Thiel, of whom more in due course, both claim to be Christians. But Hegseth, Thiel and his orange puppet aren't proper Christians. They're not on the side of God. They are the party of Mammon and the party of Satan. And the Iranians, and this is coming from one of Britain's biggest Islamophobes, so if I'm telling you, it's because I really believe it's true. The Iranians are the vanguard of the worldwide party of tradition and God, including our God, which is why the Christians of the Middle East are all rooting for them. Right, now having talked about war, I want to come back to just how dangerous this war is, and particularly not the Iranian war, because they're hoping at the moment that perhaps peace is going to break out, then we can get back to the real job, which is spending vast amounts of money building a military machine so that we can go and fight Russia in a couple of years' time with NATO. Oh, we've got a side with NATO? No, NATO is the armed wing of the global LGBTQ plus movement. NATO is the armed wing of the banksters who've screwed the entire world. They've crucified humanity on a cross of gold for lifetimes. And NATO is their armed wing. It's a monstrous, monstrous organization, which if we could leave it peacefully, all well and good. If it can be destroyed, one day it has to be destroyed. I don't care who destroys NATO. They are doing us a favor. It's as simple as that. Not least because in support of NATO and the right of homosexuals to hold LGBTQ plus pride parades, not just through Kiev, but also through Moscow after regime change, in support of that, our elite are aiming to introduce conscription. And I mentioned Peter Thiel, the tech bro puppet master behind Donald Trump. He issued I think it was a 22-point manifesto thing the other day, all rather vague and waffly. But one of the points was you've got to bring back universal military service. We have to bring back conscription, because otherwise we can't fight proper wars. So what happens if you go and fight one of Peter Thiel's proper wars? Well, we can see if I can find the right one. Where is it? I'm looking for propaganda. No. Where's it gone? Yes, this one. This headline from an online newspaper, the Daily Romania. I've checked it out. It's the case. Ukraine will attract migrants from Africa to address labour shortage, says presidential head of office Kirill Budanov. So that's one of the key people in the Zelensky regime, saying that in order to survive, in order to function economically, Ukraine is going to bring in huge numbers of migrants from Africa to address the labour shortage. Now, why have they got a labour shortage in Ukraine, people? Partly because it's got a demographic problem, of course, partly because huge numbers of Ukrainians have fled the draft and gone to Western Europe, and I don't blame them for that, but primarily because they've lost hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of men in a war that is nothing to do with any of us. It is a border quarrel between the people running Ukraine and the people running Russia, but it's only become a border quarrel and a war because NATO and the regime of Barack Obama created a war. They organized a coup d'etat, a very violent coup d'etat, which overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine, and then they tore the place to pieces. And as a result, Ukraine, which I've been there several times. It's got some very, very beautiful girls, I can tell you that. But the men are dead. And so now, to keep the economy going, and so the beautiful girls have got people to hang around with, they're going to import huge numbers of Africans. And that is where wars get you. Further than that, I'd say it's where their wars are supposed to get you. And this is very, very, well, it's relevant to America because, you know, they're pushing they've just tightened up the sort of pre-draft system, but they're pushing for it hard in Britain now. We're going to get, it's being reintroduced all over Europe. We're getting conscription. Now, especially for the Brits, but for the Americans as well, actually, conscription, if you are a Brit, means that you or your son, if he's conscripted, or grandson or whatever, you are going to end up serving in, not Western France, you're going to end up serving in Poland or the Baltic states in the Ukraine. That is where the fighting is going to be. So, this picture, I think is a very fine picture, this. This is a picture from Dunkirk. Obviously, most of the ships that picked up 300,000 British and French troops from the disaster at the start of the Second World War, most of them were a fair bit bigger than that. Even the paddle steamers and so on were bigger than that. But here you've got something that really sums up what went on. And 1/3 men were rescued in ways like that. It was only possible because when they were defeated, the British and the French armies were only a few score miles from the French and Belgian coast. So they were able to make it to Dunkirk. But I'll tell you this, my friends, if you or your son or your nephew or your grandson or your granddaughter for that matter is in the British forces in Ukraine and the front cracks and they are defeated, the ones who are not killed during the fighting will not have a Dunkirk because it's simply too far away. If they get to the coast of the Baltic like that, where do they go from there? No Dunkirk this time. If our boys and girls are sent to fight in Eastern Europe, they will either be killed in the fighting, as upward of 1 million Ukrainians already have been, or they will be taken prisoner. And they will spend out the rest of the war in some rather chilly prisoner of war camp. That's the reality of going to war with Russia, which if the Russians were to invade Kent, yeah, we've got to go to war to get them out. But the Russians haven't invaded Kent. Africans and Muslims are invading Kent and the government does nothing about it. The Russians are not going to invade Britain. They never have been about to invade Britain. They never will invade Britain. If we, or rather our rotten, stinking government, and the Tories' only complaint about this is they're not doing enough of it, if our rotten, stinking government continues giving Ukraine our most efficient and effective and dangerous missiles, and then giving them the intelligence with which to take out not just Russian military bases, but also Russian civilian targets and the oil industry. If our masters continue doing that, the Russians already said, sooner or later, don't be surprised if you wake up and find that we flattened 10 Downing Street. Well, hooray for that, if it happens. But equally, they might flatten the Shorts factory in Belfast, or one of the big West Country arms manufacturers. They could kill some of our people, just ordinary working people, just going about their job. And that would be terrible. But still, that wouldn't be the Russians invading Britain. That'll be the Russians retaliating against something insane that our government is doing. That, again, is the reality of what is going on. But if you are a Brit, especially if you're a Brit, don't worry about the fact that you, your son, your grandson or whatever is going to be dead or in a prison camp. Don't worry about that, because I can tell you this, your daughters, your sister, your girlfriend, your young wife, she'll have lots of asylum seekers to keep her company and take her out in the evening and generally look after her, because asylum seekers are protected by international law from being recruited into the armed forces of the country in which they seek asylum. So although people, perhaps jokingly sometimes on newspaper comments forums and so on, say if they're going to recruit anyone to the army, recruit the sponges who come in and send them, more sensible people think, well, is it really, really wise to give what is already, in fact, an army of military-aged men from failed states? Is it really wise to give them military training on top? That's a different question. In any case, it's not going to happen because they are protected from it by international law. So the British government cannot recruit, cannot conscript a single asylum seeker. However many hundreds of thousands are here, however many illegals come in, we cannot recruit them. They will not go to fight and die in Eastern Europe. It'll be your family go to fight and die in Eastern Europe. And that's the way. And quite apart from the geopolitics and the economics and the arms sales of the elite or elites systematically in every couple of generations cull the human herd, and they especially cull the British and the Germans and the French, the white Christians of peoples of Europe, because we are the ones who, whatever the elites work, they're sort of bad shepherds, well, all shepherds fleece and kill and eat and sell their flocks, but human elites are particularly bad shepherds, and all of them know that the threat to their rule sooner or later comes from the people they are screwing, the people they are exploiting. And the best way to stop that getting out of control is to mix those peoples up so that if they start to feel restive, the elite can set one group of peasants against the other group of peasants, but also simply kill off the best and the young men. Because if you kill off young men, it becomes impossible for the target group to resist anything else, because it's young men who stand up and say, no, you're not going to do that to my community. No, you're not going to do that to my wife or daughter. No, you're not doing it. To us, we'll stand and fight you. Well, if they're all dead in ditches, whether it's in Flanders or in Crimea or in Ukraine, wherever it is, if they're all dead in ditches or in prison camps or sitting at home after the war with their heads on their hands, drinking vast amounts of alcohol because they're all screwed up, then your rule as an elite is guaranteed. And any time you see stuff designed to make you want to go and fight someone foreign, just remember that. Let me dive into the chat here and see, or many people have joined us now. Andrew Lightham, hello, good evening to you. John Kopasaki, hello. Could a link be put up for a donation, but perchance? Not by me, Andy, because I haven't got a moderator connection on here at present. Stuart Bowden, how do we get our children avoiding a draft? Very, very good question indeed, I would say, Stuart. One, you've got to teach them these things, and teach them about the elite and the cynical lies that they tell, so that they're proof against it in the first place. And two, I would say, assuming that they know that it's a bad idea, but if they're liable to be put into the draft, if they're liable to be drafted and conscripted, all they've got to do is to say, to get themselves a patriotic tattoo. That'll do for a start. And then to say, yeah, I can't wait to join the army because I want to kill the people who've invaded Britain. And that'll do. Or I want military training because then if the government try to enforce another COVID lockdown upon us, or if they try to take away all our rights, I'm going to fight them. Yeah, that'll do. Or I don't mind particularly the fact that homosexuality is legal between consenting adults behind closed doors. But if they try and enforce it on my children and say that if I want to stop that, I'm wicked and they will take my children away, at that point, I will get a gun and shoot people. That would do it as well. Any of those threats, and you will not be allowed to join the army. There was a fella in the Navy, I think it was in the papers just the other day in Britain, trainee Navy, I think officer, and as part of a discussion group in there in classroom training, they were asked about multiculturalism and diversity, and he made a comment critical of Islam. So he's no longer in Navy. So that'll do it as well. Happy birthday to who, Sir Ivan Cooper? Whose birthday is it? Even Jeffrey Bloom was on about women we were left at their mercy. Yeah, Jeffrey's not a bad chap, actually. I used to know him in the Parliament. He and I both used to go along to sort of a semi-official group of people interested in real animal welfare. And there are all sorts of greens and freaks there. They're always slightly confused to have Bloom and me there, agreeing with them that cruelty to animals is a very bad thing. Ivan Cooper says, go to Nick's Substack. Do him, please. Thank you, Ivan. Yes, if you want to donate to me, the best way to do it is to go on Substack, which is a brilliant app in its own right. There's so many good writers and podcasters there. It really is quite something. Good algorithms as well. If you're interested in something, you will find it. But it's also a good way to donate, because you simply take out a sub, and yes, Substack get about an 8% cut or something similar, but the rest comes to whoever the writer is. In my case, me. So, yep, please do it. Much obliged. Right then, let me dive back into my notes and see what we got next. Coming back to Iran then. Will there be peace? Because just the other day, Donald Trump was coming out with hellfire and damnation just around the corner, and now all of a sudden he tacos yet again, and there's peace yet again. Except for the fact that because the American embargo is still in place, embargo and blockade is still in place. The Iranians are saying, well, in that case, our blockade is still in place. So they've fired at one and taken 2 ships apparently into custody today for breaking their blockade, the same as the Americans did yesterday with an Iranian ship breaking their blockade. So it looks as though the ceasefire will unravel. And I would say that the chances of peace lasting are very, very unlikely indeed. And that is because, as I covered, I won't go into this in length here now, because I covered this a fortnight ago here on Purge and on Substack. And also I wrote about it on Substack on April the 4th, long before other people were saying this, but it's now getting quite widespread, that the aim of this war is not to do A, B, C, and D to Iran and stop them doing X, Y, and Z to other people. The aim of this war is massive destruction of the energy infrastructure of which supplies a large part of the world. That's not oh my God, if it all goes wrong, that's what's going to happen. That is the aim of the people doing this. Now, I spoke a fortnight ago about this, and I said in particular, people who say it's about the petrodollar are slightly missing the point. I explained how the petrodollar used to work, this recycling mechanism whereby everyone bought oil in dollars, and then the Saudi Arabians and the other Gulf states poured the money into the USA. And I explained also how it ended, the petrodollar agreement ended 2 years ago. It's already finished. As a result of that, although a lot of Saudi oil still is sold in dollars and oil is still priced internationally in dollars, a lot of Saudi trade now is in yuan, in euros, in yen, and in rupees. The petrodollar is already dead or dying. Now, the recycling mechanism whereby money which is used to buy oil, gas, etc., ends up in the USA as dollars, it's still important. There's 2 bubbles in the United States right now. They're huge. Now, this should give Americans in particular, but if America catches a cold, we get the flu. It's even worse for us. So people who think, well, perhaps it doesn't matter too much if this goes on a bit longer, as long as they're not blowing things up, then what difference does a blockade make? A blockade is not only destroying, well, 3 weeks' time, you won't be able to fly in much of the Western world because there won't be enough aviation fuel. It's going to push up all your prices. It's going to create food shortages, etc., etc. But it's also stopping the Gulf states earning lots of dollars to continue pumping them into the USA. And there's 2 bubbles in the USA which will burst if this goes on much longer. The first, the AI thing, is a bubble. Now, AI is real. It's really very, very powerful. But there's no AI company in the history of AI which has actually made money out of it yet. They're only making money. They're only able to afford to do it because people are pouring money in. It's a sort of giant Ponzi scheme. Now, at the end, AI may well emerge from this. The ones who get through, who actually come up with the right stuff and come to dominate the market, they will be very, very rich. But behind them, there will be a litter of dead AI companies that took suckers' money, including the suckers like the Saudi Arabians, blew it, trying to develop things they couldn't, and went bust. So in that sense, although AI is a real thing and it's going to drastically affect our world even more so than now, the AI operation as a whole is a giant Ponzi bubble, and it will burst. And it's worth something like $25 trillion. That's one bubble, $25 trillion bubble, relying on Saudi money, and Saudi money only comes if the Gulf of Hormuz is open. And then there's another bubble affecting the United States, a private credit bubble. After 2008, when the big banks had made such a shambles of lending money to subprime mortgagees, etc., there were much tighter restrictions brought in on how banks could go about lending money. As a result of which, a private credit industry developed, unregulated, lending money to all sorts of people who really shouldn't have it because the short-term gains are good. The private credit bubble in the United States is now $6 trillion. So you've got 25 trillion and 6 trillion. Compare that with the subprime crash of 2008, which involved the total amount of money on all the properties foreclosed in the United States. The total they were theoretically worth was 1.6 trillion. And the bursting of a bubble of 1.6 trillion caused the 2008 credit disaster, which the world still hasn't recovered from. We're all up to our necks in debt from the COVID nonsense and from that. So 25 trillion plus 6, $31 trillion as against 1.6 trillion in the case of the subprime market. These are huge bubbles, absolutely gigantic. And also, of course, very important, just to finish off the recap, it's not just about the petrodollar, it's also about the dollar as a reserve currency. So that anyone around the world who wants to trade with someone else around the world has to buy dollars that the private Federal Reserve Bank invents out of thin air and then sells them for real things and real money and real gold, etc., etc. It's the biggest scam in human history. Haven't got time to go into that now. It's little understood because the Marxists never talk about it, because Marx had his orders from the big bankers and the Illuminati, the Masonic types who were running the show and wanted communism as a way of smashing up the old system. So Marx doesn't talk about it. The left doesn't talk about it. It's not that well known. But the creation of credit by private banks as an interest-bearing debt is the ultimate scam. And the private Federal Reserve Bank was at the top of the tree for that scam. But by 2001, even by then, only 73% of global foreign exchange reserves were in dollars. 73%. It had been it was 90% at one stage. It had dropped to 73%. And in 2023, it had dropped to 58%, and it's still dropping. So the people running the USA are losing that vast amount of foreign money coming in, which is what allows them to keep the United States functioning, and especially to keep their military power all around the world, to send American boys and girls to fight and die all around the world in wars that have got nothing to do with them. The reason that the Americans, good people that they are, voted for Donald Trump in the first place and then again. And in order to keep the dollar up, whether it's the petrodollar or the global Federal Reserve, the only way they can do to keep the dollar up is to pull the others down. So the euro and the pound sterling have been dragged down by the Ukrainian sanctions and by the terrorist attack on the Nord Stream pipeline, creating economic and energy disaster for us. Now the Iran blockades are cutting off China, Japan, India, etc., from the oil and the petrochemicals that really fuel their economic miracles. But a blockade can be lifted at any time. If the whole of the Gulf, if the whole lot, Iraq and all the Gulf states, is blown to hell, and the desalination plants and the nuclear power plant the Iranians have and so on, this is permanent destruction. And I'm telling you again, as I told you 2 weeks ago, as I wrote on April the 4th, various different elites want this permanent destruction. The Wall Street financial elite want it for the reason I've just told you. The World Economic Forum want it because that crazy bunch, and they're ultimately funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, They want to drastically crash our carbon footprint. They want to kill off huge numbers of human beings. They believe there are too many of us. So our numbers have got to be got down. The ultra-Zionists want it because to have their greater Israel, that involves, I'll just show you the map because it's such a thing, this. Where's the map of greater Israel? Here you go. Look how the borders, the southern border of the greater Israel, well, look at how left and right they take a vast amount of Egypt and a vast amount of Iraq, Syria and Turkey. That would displace about 150 million Muslim refugees and a few million Christians, most of whom would try to come to Europe and America. Not a good idea. But look how much of Saudi Arabia. They believe their God has told them that they must take, and they must take it soon. So much so that they get warm water port access in both of those all-important Gulfs and Straits. How on earth is Israel going to take that off Saudi Arabia unless someone has destroyed Saudi Arabia? So if the Iranians can be provoked into taking out Saudi Arabia's desalination plants, that'll do the job. Then the IDF can walk in and take another chunk of somebody else's land, as their prophecies, etc., tell them they've got to do. But not just them, there's also, and this comes back to America, Technocracy Inc. I've talked about, again, I'll show you the picture of this just in case anyone here is new. Have I got it? Where's the Technocracy Inc. map? Oh, I haven't got it. No, I really haven't. Look up the Technate map, 1940. And this was a sort of fascist movement which was big in the United States and in Canada. And it wanted to abolish democracy, to abolish your right to vote. Even though the vote's not worth much, at least it's a right. To take away the right of Americans to vote, you would have to take away their guns. So it wanted to disarm Americans. It actually sided with the Nazis. So when Canada entered the war in 1939, it was banned. And the key man who designed that map of the greater North American Technate, including Greenland, Canada, the United States, Mexico, Venezuela, Mr. Joshua Haldeman, fled to South Africa, where he became Elon Musk's maternal grandfather. And they're still at it, these technocrats, these people. And their aim is, and they're talking about it quite openly now, they say that democracy's had its day. America has to be run by a technocracy. It has to be run by AI, and it'll be really good. Well, no, it won't be. Americans, you are the targets. Even more than Iran, more than Saudi Arabia. You are the targets of the blockade that Trump has been encouraged, provoked, lied to, or whatever to impose, because that blockade is going to cause, if it carries on, but not that much longer, it's going to cause an economic catastrophe on a staggering scale. And that's what the techno people want. Let me show you a picture of a couple of them. Time's flying on. I must push on with this. So I won't look at the comments for a bit. But here we have J.D. Vance, Vice President, Peter Thiel, the supposedly Christian homosexual who runs Palantir, and Curtis Yarvin on the right, who he Ed, people asked if he used to read Private Eye. Right then, so J.D. Vance, you know. Peter Thiel heads a company called Palantir, named after the Ring of Power, or the Rings of Power, created in Lord of the Rings. And every single person who got hold of a Palantir, a Ring of Power, was utterly corrupted by it. But Peter Thiel named his company, created with vast amounts of money from Israel and with help from the IDF. He created it and called it this thing. He's a Christian, or says he's a Christian, because he's obsessed with the Antichrist. And he claims, he believes that AI can help defeat the Antichrist. This man is really very, very strange. He's also the man, his Palantir is the system the IDF has been using to target the people they've been wanting to kill in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, and in Iran. They're the people, any time that they've hit a group of school children or whatever, it's because Palantir has told them that is your target. Peter Thiel's company is directly involved in mass genocidal slaughter of innocent Muslim families and of Christian Arabs and of Christian, and for that matter, of Jewish Iranians. The small Jewish community in Iran are up in arms at present. You won't read about it in the mainstream news. They're up in arms in support of their government against the Israelis who just flattened their main synagogue. That's what they do. You're coming back to Peter Thiel, the one in the middle there. His aim with Palantir in America is the total integration. I'm talking to you now, Americans. It's the total integration of all your personal records, all of them, from tax, medical, and everything else. It's to create a GovCorp. It's to create a government corporate dictatorship. It's as simple as that. It's to cause so much trouble. It's to replace the dollar, and certainly silver and gold, to replace them with central bank digital currency. And if you still have an ounce of faith in Donald Trump, remember, he is the one who imposed the vax rollout and the mandates, killing huge numbers of people, maiming hundreds of thousands of people. So yes, and these people basically run Donald Trump. Now, the ugly creature on the right, Curtis Yarvin, he's the sort of intellectual powerhouse, suppose for this, for a movement called the neo-reactionaries. They're all arch libertarians. They believe basically you shouldn't have much government, but the government that you've got to have has got to be post-democratic. It's got to be by the techno elite. And that is, and Curtis Yarvin, he and Nick Land, who's a Brit, supposedly a Brit of the same ilk. They are the intellectual prostitutes. That's the wrong picture. I want to get rid of the picture altogether. Go away. Go away. Shoo. That's it. They're the intellectual prostitutes selling the theoretical dream of how lovely it would be to have a technocratic state where benevolent tech bro giants like Peter Thiel and their AI micromanage every aspect of your life. And all you've got to do to allow that to happen is to give up your vote and give up your guns and leave them to it. And really, I don't believe anyone in their right minds can go along with that deal. But coming back to the point of the blockade and the damage it's going to do, what I've just described is so monstrous. It's such a huge, a wicked aim that there's no possibility of them imposing that. And they're determined to impose it. And they're pouring huge sums of money, vast sums of money. Thiel financed Vance in the same way that the Adelsons and a few other multi-billionaire Likud billionaires financed Trump. People like that don't finance politicians for fun. They finance them for power. And they've got this hideous solution they want to impose on us. How do you impose a hideous solution? By having a hideous problem. Before you can persuade Americans to give up the dollar, you have to destroy the dollar. You have to have a global financial catastrophe. And that is what they're aiming at here. Now, if you thought perhaps, is Nick out on a limb here, talking about global destruction as being the aim of the elite and the aim of the Trump-Netanyahu war? Well, just before we go, I want to tell you a bit about this chap. This is Michael Hudson, who's a very high-powered American economist, academic economist. He's professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, a researcher at the Levy Economics Institute at Bard College. The big fish. And I want to quote from a couple of things which he's recently written. What US officials call national security strategy is to how to recover and maintain America's control over other countries by weaponizing the dollar-centered financial system and its foreign trade. As Nick Griffin told you. He didn't say that, I did. Going on again to what Mr. Hudson says. Sanctions were imposed to isolate and injure Venezuela. And in February 2022, the United States imposed trade sanctions against Russia's oil and gas exports to Western Europe. And in September 2022, destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline. These attacks enabled America to force the former customers of Russia and Venezuela into reliance on US oil and natural gas exports at much higher prices, crippling German and other European industry and chemical companies. With Russian oil isolated by sanctions and America securing a quick military victory over Venezuela, the only major source of oil to be brought more directly under US control was the Middle East. And he goes on to say it's 20% of the world's oil, 30% of its trade, 40% of its trade in natural gas, a third of its fertilizer, half of the seaborne sulfur trade, with which you can't extract minerals from iron ores. He says how other oil-producing countries, Iraq, Syria, and Libya, have been destroyed by US military intervention and the United States proxy army of Al-Qaeda's Sunni Wahhabi terrorists, who were given free rein to fight their religious war against non-Sunni populations as long as they submitted to US control of the oil trade. Syria too has been destroyed and taken over by such a US proxy army. Coming back to Nick Griffin, that's of course what I was telling you at the start of the show, that the Islamist terrorists are backed by the people running and ruining the United States, not by Iran. Professor Hudson goes on to say, Trump has stated that opening the Straits of Hormuz to restore OPEC exports isn't America's job, nor even in its industry, as it's not a major customer for this oil and gas. His plan B is to let the strait remain closed, assuming the US economy will be less seriously affected than those of other countries. And he says, goes on to say that basically any more provocation will mean the Iranians will destroy all the oil industry of the whole Persian Gulf. And he says, the retaliatory destruction of the Gulf's oil production will plunge the world's economies into as serious a depression as the Great Depression of the 1930s. There are no substitutes available for oil, gas, helium, sulfur, and fertilizer. Entire production chains will have to be shut down, causing unemployment and debt defaults. US policy has sought to maintain world dominance by destroying whatever assets it cannot control and monopolize for itself, from oil and food crops to information technology and alternatives to the dollarized international monetary system. That is what is going on with this. That is why I tell you that people ask, has Donald Trump gone mad? No, he hasn't. If that was the case, every now and again he'd do something which was going to work, just by law of averages. Madmen do some things which are very mad, some things which are very clever, because they're mad. They just do it. That's not what's going on. What is going on now is a deliberate attempt to destroy a large part of the world's productive capacity. It's something so utterly wicked because it'll starve huge numbers of people to death, and it'll destroy your liberties. This isn't just the Chinese, the Indians, the poor starving farmers in Africa. It's you as well. It's going to be your freedoms that go as well. This is so monstrous that they cannot possibly be revealed as being the people behind it. So they have to have an old fool of a president surrounded by vicious, wicked men and full of his own self-pumped up importance. They had to have him to do it. So when it's all gone horribly wrong, not just in the next 6 months, when it's still horribly wrong 10, 15 years down the line, they turn around and say, well, it's Trump's fault, nothing we could do about it. But they'll also turn around and say one other very important thing. They'll also say the people who want to take away the right of decent Americans to vote and to have guns, the likes of Jack Palance, the Green leader in Britain, who's saying that people on the right must be taken out of society. They must not be part of society. We must not have any rights. When this shambles has destroyed so much of the world, the left, whether it's the incoming Democrats in Britain, whether it's a Green Labour coalition, which we could yet get in Britain in 3 years' time, the left, everywhere they come to power, will say, look what democracy delivered. Look what those wicked old right-wing men did. We must get rid of it all. You know what? AI will do a far better job. And as always, the left and the intellectuals will cozy up to tyranny, will cozy up to the corporations, and will cozy up to the left. And that's what they will impose. That's what's coming, my friend. Friends, that's what's coming. There is only one thing, as a matter of fact, one possibility. What I've described to you will not happen. Fortunately, it's quite a serious possibility. I don't know, perhaps it's 30%. So I'm not saying this is going to happen for sure. I'm saying it's planned to happen for absolutely certain. But there's one chance of it not happening. And that's if Israel says no. Not Netanyahu. Netanyahu has to say, yeah, carry on, because if peace breaks out, Netanyahu falls and he goes to prison. So he wants war. The Zionist, ultra-Zionist, especially the religious Zionist crazies, they want this war to go to total destruction, not only because they want to take half of Saudi Arabia, but also because they believe that their Messiah won't come and sit in Jerusalem and rule the whole world under Noahide laws that force all the rest of us to submit to them. They believe it won't happen this side of a global catastrophe and an enormous war in the Middle East. So these people want crazy war. But remember that just before October the 6th was very convenient for Netanyahu, because October the 6th stopped Israel probably having a civil war between the crazy far-right, actually fascist and religiously insane maniacs who now run Israel, and the people who are rather saner. They're still Zionists. Some of them believe they can do some sort of deal with their Arab neighbours. Others of them still want to expel their Arab neighbours. But they're not as mad as the barking mad ones running the show now. And they know that the Iron Dome is full of holes. They know, as Jim Dawson was saying yesterday, that Israel has suffered far bigger losses than they're admitting, not just in Lebanon against Hezbollah, but also in terms of the number of missiles that have got through and their decreasing capability to keep Iranian missiles out. And those people will be desperate for peace. And they're the only people with enough clout to force Trump and the crazy Christian Zionist loons running America near to this global disaster. The only people who might have the power to stop this are the more sensible, more secular Zionists in Israel, if they can overcome Netanyahu. The Israeli military is run by smart men. Yeah, some of them are monsters, but it's run by smart men. And if they decide that this is a war they cannot win and they're going to suffer terribly, then they can say, stop this war. If they don't, then it's going to stop our world. It's as simple as that. Right, I am going to leave you in a moment with an end slate, which is a piece of music. Now, this is raw English folk. This is by Peter Bellamy, one of my personal favourites, but it's quite harsh listening. This is the raw English tradition. No instruments, just one man singing a cappella, perhaps others joining in with the chorus. And this is the late, great Peter Bellamy singing Tommy, which is one of Rudyard Kipling's greatest poems, which I thought was particularly fitting, having talked about the horrors of conscription and the fact that these maniacs want to cull all of us, or at least lots of us. So I'm going to leave you with that. Also, I mentioned, by the way, that I'm doing a Substack article about Peter Bellamy and how he was hounded to his death by leftist bigots, and how his father was a right-hand man of Oswald Mosley, who was imprisoned under 18B and also persecuted for loving his country. A fascinating story, which I'll get to you reasonably soon on Substack. Other than that, do keep on watching the other things or reading the other things I'm writing there. I've got to get off, as I say. Peter Bellamy and Kipling's Tommy coming up in a moment. Do please join Jim Dawson here tomorrow on Purge TV, same time, same place, and come back to me next Wednesday, when, God willing, I will be there. Until then, do please remember that all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. So get out there and do something. Deus Vult.
I went into a public house to get a pint of beer. The publican he up and says we serve no red coats here. The girls behind the bar, they laughed and giggled fit to die. When I out into the streets again, and to myself says I, well, it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy go away. But it's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. When the band begins to play, me boys, the band begins to play. It's thank you, Mr. Atkins, when the band begins to play. So I went into a theatre as sober as could be. They give a drunk civilian room, but they added none for me. They sent me to the gallery or round the music halls. But when it comes to fighting, Lord, they shove me in the stalls. 'Cause it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and Tommy wait outside. But it's special train for Atkins when the troopers on the tide. When the troop ship's on the tide, me boys, the troop ship's on the tide. It's special train for Atkins when the troopers on the tide. Yes, making mock of uniforms, what guards you while you sleep. It's cheaper than them uniforms and they're starvation cheap. And hustling drunken soldiers when they go in larger bits. Well, it's 5 times better business than parading in full kits. Well, it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and Tommy, how's your soul? But it's a thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll. When the drums begin to roll, me boys, the drums begin to roll. It's a thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll. Well, we aren't no thin red heroes, no, we aren't no blackguards too. We're just single men in barracks, most remarkable IQ. And if sometimes our conduct isn't all your fancy paints, well, single men in barracks don't grow into plaster saints. While it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and Tommy fall behind. But it's please walk in front, sir, when there's trouble in the wind. When there's trouble in the wind, me boys, there's trouble in the wind. It's please to walk in front, sir, when there's trouble in the wind. Now you talk of better food for us and schools and fires and all. We'll wait for extra rations if you treat us rational. Don't mess about them cookroom slops, but prove it to our face that the winner's uniform is not the soldier man's disgrace. But it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and chuck him out the boots. But he's the hero of his country when the guns begin to shoot. Well, it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and anything you please. But Tommy ain't no bleeding fool, you bet that Tommy sees.